context of this discourse is conversation that Jesus has with the Pharisees after the story of the man born blind. So the story of the man born blind ends with the Pharisees asking Jesus, well, are we also blind? And Jesus says to them, if you were blind, then you would have no sin. But since you say, we see, your blindness remains. And that's the beginning of this discourse. Now, the thing that's important to recognize about this is that this argument between Jesus and the Pharisees reflects the situation that was present in the community of Israel after the Jewish war, when the Pharisees were dominant. That's what's reflected in John 9. In John 9, in the story of the man born blind, the Pharisees are in charge. And so the audience of John is addressed as the Pharisees. Now what that means is that the people who heard this identified with the Pharisees and saw themselves and could be addressed as Pharisees. That is, as pious Jews who cared about the nation, who cared about their communities, who cared about God and about the observance of the law of God. And so Jesus is addressing the audience then as Pharisees. If you want to think of a metaphor for this, Pharisees were like Methodists or Baptists or Presbyterians or Catholics. They are the people who are religious. They attend the synagogue services. They observe the law. They do what is right and good, and they care about it. They are not like the people who have nothing to do with the religion or who are indifferent to it. And so that's who Jesus is talking to. And he is talking to them in relation to how they will respond, both to the priority of the healing of the man born blind and all that that symbolizes, but also of their relationship with him. Now, this parable of the Good Shepherd is a very powerful metaphor of relationship between Jesus and the sheep. And it develops the metaphor that is present in Ezekiel chapter 34. And I would recommend that you read that. I won't try to read it all to you, but this discourse is set in the context of the memories of those who knew Ezekiel 34. It begins with a condemnation of those who are false shepherds. So God says to Ezekiel, "Mortal, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to the shepherds, thus says the Lord God, ah, you shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves. Shouldn't shepherds feed the sheep?" And then later on, "As I live, says the Lord God, because my sheep have become a prey, and my sheep have become food for all the wild animals, since there was no shepherd. And because my shepherds have not searched for my sheep, but the shepherds have fed themselves and have not fed my sheep. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God, I am against the shepherds, and I will demand my sheep at their hand and put a stop to their feeding the sheep. No longer shall the shepherds feed themselves. I will rescue my sheep from their mouths, so that they may not be food for them." And then God identifies himself as the true shepherd. God says, "I myself will search for my sheep, and I will seek them out. As shepherds seek out their flocks when they are among their scattered sheep, so I will seek out my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places to which they have been scattered on a day of clouds and their thick darkness. I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries and will bring them into their own land." So what is in the background of this discourse of Jesus is this promise of that God will be the shepherd for the people and will bring them out of the lands to which they have been scattered by the exile. So God will then bring them back. Another part of this, then, at the end is, I will make with them a covenant of peace and banish wild animals from the land, so that they may live in the wild and sleep in the woods securely. I will make them and the region around my hill a blessing, and I will send down the showers in their season. They shall be showers of blessing. The trees of the field shall yield their fruit, and the earth shall yield its increase. And at the end, you are my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, and I am your God, says the Lord God. Now, in effect, what happens in Jesus' version of this parable is that Jesus identifies himself in the role of God. Also, then he makes it clear in the last part of the discourse that the Father is the one who has sent him. So he is doing God's work, but he is doing it at the Father's command. The contrast that is drawn between the good shepherd and the hired hand is then that the hired hand runs away. Now, in the background of this discourse is also the recent experience of the people of Israel, namely the Jewish war. And during the war, the people were brought together in Jerusalem. They were besieged by the Romans, and many of the leaders ran away during the time when the Romans came back and attacked Israel. And so the scattering of the people was something that they had experienced. They were scattered all over the known world. And they were scattered in part because the ones who were responsible ran away. Jesus laid down his life. Now, this reference to Jesus laying down his life is, on the one hand, in the story in John, a prophecy of what Jesus will do. In the context of the community of Israel in 95, when the Gospel of John was written and first performed and told, they know that Jesus had already laid down his life. That had happened 60 years before. And so the reflection of this discourse about the contrast between Jesus' love for the sheep and the others who are not true shepherds but are bad shepherds, that contrast is made very clear. Another part of the context is that just prior to this, Jesus says that all those who have come before are thieves and lestes. It's translated as robbers here. But what it means is, it's a reference to the zealots, those who led the war. The word lestes meant the revolutionaries, the insurrectionists, the brigands who stole in order to support the revolution. Another part of the background of this is that Jesus is contrasting himself with the zealots, with those who led the people into war and then either ran away or led them to be killed. But in contrast, Jesus lays down his life for the sheep. And it is a choice that he freely makes. This is not a choice of weakness. This is not a choice of his being a pacifist, of his being someone who didn't do anything, or who was simply killed against his will. His choice is to lay down his life as a free gift, as an exercise of his own power. So when, at the end of this, he says, I have power to lay it down and I have power to take it up again, he's making it clear that this is not out of weakness. This is rather a choice about nonviolent resistance, and that he lays down his life, and as a result of that, he has the authority, the power to take it up again. That is, to be raised and to live with the people in the context of their new lives. Another dimension of this speech is, I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. And the question is, who does this refer to? Now, in most of the commentaries and in the annotated Bibles, such as the Harper's annotated Bible, they say this refers to the Gentiles. I do not think so. I think it refers to the various communities of Israel, the Samaritans, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the now forming group of Christians, that is, of apostolic Jews who believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and that Jesus is then being portrayed here as the one who will bring together all of the sheep. It is a fulfillment of the prophecy in Ezekiel that God says, I will bring back all of my sheep who have been scattered all over the world, and I will bring them together so that they will be one. That's the promise that Jesus gives here, is that he will reunify the people of Israel, and that he will bring them together and they will be one flock and one shepherd. So this is a discourse of intense love that is politically and religiously focused in relation to the community of Israel, the Jews of the late first century. So when you tell this story, think of that context, and also then of the context in which the people to whom you are telling this story are experiencing warfare, are experiencing being abandoned by their leaders, of being used by them, of being left alone. That is the experience that is common between the people of the world now and the people to whom this discourse was addressed in the first century.